I would like to begin by reading this extract, which is taken from the sermons of Columbanus, Psalm 41.2. Let us concern ourselves with things divine, and as pilgrims ever sigh for and desire our homeland. For the end of the road is ever the object of travellers' hopes and desires, and thus, since we are all travellers and pilgrims in the world, let us ever ponder on the end of the road that is our life, for the end of the roadway is our home. Hello, my name is Paula Thompson-Fearnley and I am an academic theologian and professional photographer. From an early age, I have always been intrigued by the stories of the Celtic saints when my parents first took me on a pilgrimage to Iona. Northumberland is and always has been my spiritual home, but over the years I have travelled and lived in Yorkshire and New Zealand. I have visited Spain, France, Germany, Holland, Greece, Italy, to name but a few, but I've always been brought back to my spiritual home of Northumberland. My humble life began in Hexham, then in Kielder. Kielder is a tiny village close to the Scottish borders, surrounded by a forest. It was here that my admiration of the natural landscape grew, surrounded by huge quantities of Scots pine, larch and oak, and accompanied by an extensive range of wildlife such as deer, badger, otter and red squirrel. I grew up with the stories of the saints. I felt in tune with their pioneering footsteps. I grew up in the faith, believing in what it stood for, and I felt the presence of it in the hills and on the forest floor. I sang my first solo in a little parish church just outside the village. I was baptised there and took my first communion. The grey stonework of the buildings intrigues me still, and I can recall being enraptured with a cluster of whitewashed cottage walls in the village and the intricate carvings of the stonemasons. My childhood felt inordinately protected. It was an idyllic childhood. I knew I was loved in one of the most beautiful settings in the entire world. We were a proud bunch really, with strong Celtic ancient traditions that were played out in the way in which we celebrated life, with charm and character. Dances were held regularly. County fairs were an immense event in the social calendar, and the school I attended was a joy to walk to each morning, even if I was careful not to stand on the cracks of the wooden bridge just in case I fell in. The pace of life was different then, much easier and simpler. Emphasis was structured around the family. Everyone knew everyone else, and with that knowledge came a sense of belonging and of security. One of the major events of my life then was the little blue van that came around once a week to bring groceries to the village. I took the responsibility of looking after my little brother while my mother shopped at the van. I felt very important at a very early age. The church in the area was the focus of village life. It was a family occasion and the only real place to socialise on a regular basis. We came together to celebrate life and to pray. I understood what my forefathers meant when they walked with nature and preached the word of God. God was omnipresent. He existed in the trees that surrounded the village. His love was blown across the water and sent the wind across my face. His love existed in the smiles of people I knew and in the hearts of my extended family. He was my friend, my comforter, my all, and my family supported and protected me in the same way in which the trees that surrounded us stood firm and tall. Yet I did not have the greatest beginning in life. I went into emergency foster care at 18 months old, arriving as I did on an unknown doorstep, cradled in the arms of my sister, covered in dirt, dressed in a potato sack, clutching a carrier bag with a few disease-ridden possessions. The country life seemed to be in comparison a place of great salvation, of peace, of comfort, and of course, home. The supporting years. I went to school, I did the social rounds, I grew, I danced around the maypole, blue skirt billowing, wore mayflowers in my hair, had scraped knees, could never climb a rope to save my life, and fell down a flight of stairs, knocking all my teeth out. But I loved nature and I loved my surroundings, and I longed for the days that we would spend walking in the woods. I had a new family and 3 brothers, and then one night out of the blue I discovered I had yet another. I lost my baby teeth, had my first kiss. I lost and gained, got married, then wasn't suddenly despite my idealistic misgivings. Yet as a consequence, I had 2 beautifully wonderful sons. For a few years while my boys were growing up, I wrote a book, discovered that I had an autistic son, and went through an expansive cathartic process in a spiritual way, as I had a great deal of questions with no answers as to why my marriage had ended in such a gruesome divorce, and why I had this amazing boy that simply wouldn't or couldn't talk. I became a single parent of 2 sons under the age of 18 months. It felt like history was repeating itself, what with my adoption and fostering care and all the while my faith sustained me. I hung on till my youngest child went to school. The first day he went, I went into an agency asking for work. They were called the Office Angels. They were in a fix. I needed somebody to help desperately at the university, and could I possibly go straight away to help out that very afternoon? I remember quite vividly being asked to sit and answer the telephone, and the academic doctor who ran the department said to me, "Why, you can answer the phone with sense and make an excellent cup of coffee. Sit there and don't move." I never looked back. Dr. Mitchell shortly after that nominated me for the start of a degree. It took some confidence to go to my first ever lecture. It was a philosophy tradition. Are we all brains in a vat? I don't mind telling you that my mind felt like a scrambled egg when I walked out of the room. Was I crazy, I asked myself? How could I possibly commit to working full-time, raising 2 young sons and take a degree too? The degree would take me 4.5 years to complete, and so I studied literature, philosophy, sociology, politics, and I discovered through this that I was hungry for more. After I'd finished my first degree, I felt increasingly restless, but I needed a short break. So I booked a holiday for my 2 sons and my parents to France and drove all the way there with the rest of them lolling in the car, tired and road sick. I didn't even stop to think that I might not be able to drive on the opposite side of the road. I knew somehow I would manage, but my restlessness grew. I had previously realised that I wanted to study more, but I had no idea what subject interested me. It wasn't until we were visiting a cathedral called St. Anne d'Auray in the Morbihan region that it became apparent. We had hired a beautiful country cottage in Gurn that my mother and I realised just didn't feel right somehow. My mother had always been sensitive to negativity of this sort and was concerned about the possibilities that such negativity, if it was true, could be passed on to her grandsons. As I was of the same opinion, we agreed to visit the well-known cathedral to ask for a blessing, anything to dispel this horrible feeling we had whenever we went into this cottage. It was while visiting the sacred site that I believed I received what is known as a calling. The calling was simple. I had to endeavour to love God more. This set me on an amazing quest to discover exactly what those words meant for me. It became apparent that my studies should lead me in a theological direction, the result of which had me enrolling as a postgraduate student at York St John University. I will, however, admit to being sorely tested in my faith during this time. In between my studies, commencing and receiving this strange yet wonderful calling, I struggled enormously trying to come to terms with what that meant to me. We were living in Willesden at the time, and the vicar of the parish can attest to the fact that I would sit in the church quietly for hours and hours, with tears streaming down my face, unable to figure out what it was I needed to do. I struggled with the studies also. I didn't want to know about Calvinism or liberal theology. It was extremely confusing to me to realise that there were so many different strands of Christianity. My mind felt like it was going to explode. I realised I had an awful lot to learn. It wasn't until I was about to complete my studies when the thought struck me that there was a connection between the visual aesthetic and the narrative itself, and that these 2 separate communications were interconnectable. I was asked to prove transcendent action through the visual image. I approached the vicar at St Matthew's at Bankfoot, where my parents, children and I went to church, to ask if she would support my academic proposal. Her reply was, "If you can interpret the chapter of Revelations, I will give you the job." In 2 weeks, I returned with a synopsis and was given the task in hand. The accepted proposal was used to create a piece of art that revealed transcendent action in faith, which interpreted the purpose of the church, reaching out into the community. I had to receive audience feedback and submit my proposal academically. The artwork gained official recognition and was entitled Energized by Faith. Its main purpose was to create and give inspiration to its parishioners as they move forward into the community with this mission-driven project. The doors of the designed architect's tube that was part of the plan to bring the community into church has the engraving of the artwork etched into it. I knew then that I wanted to spend the rest of my life in one way or another translating God's transcendent action. I had become a very welcome vessel, but frustratingly felt that I could accomplish more, yet I felt somehow that I was still being held back. I have and do still describe myself as being eternally creative. Art has been utilised throughout the centuries as a medium in which to convey spiritual meaning. Some refer to this as the Holy Spirit in action. The difficulty lies in proving its existence, yet through the written word and through art we see its effects in an illuminating, often life-changing way. It was definitely that way for me. Photography, therefore, has become another medium in which to express that action. It is interesting to note that on my photography journey, I discovered that I had reacquainted myself in answering God's call, which had little to do with the reasons that I took the degree in the first place. I like to think that God was working in me to create his own purpose. From that point on, it wasn't difficult to re-establish my fascination with the landscape, the beauty in Northumberland, my childhood Celtic roots, and a love of the saints. It was simply a case of marrying them all together. My task in hand. My task has been to translate what I feel St. Aidan may have seen on his journey so that we can better understand God's true purpose, not only for myself but in the act of creating for others, and actually see his life from an aesthetic and spiritual perspective, and to stand also and marvel at what Aidan accomplished in the time he had on this earth, and to see and acknowledge the difference he made. His lasting legacy is there for us to see. All you need to do is look.